Hey, we're live. What do you know? Well, look at that. Hey, a wonderful OCD Awareness Week to you, Stacey Conroy. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Awesome. As always, we are here on the first Mondays of every month discussing OCD and substance use. Stacey, I'm getting a little bit of feedback from you, some noisy noises. I don't know.
Oh,
That's better. I don't. Oh, wait. No, I heard
is
some.
it better or worse or?
Now it's better. I'm not hearing them now. So.
Okay.
I didn't know if you were scratching on something or what it was. So.
No, I do have a fan on in the room, so if it comes back, let me know.
Okay. All right. You were just talking to me about something that I thought was interesting, sober curious. You want to fill everybody in on that, what that is?
Sure. Well, and it's a new term for me too. I'm looking into it, but I was reading different things as I tend to do, particularly in the field of recovery from various concerns, including SUD. Mm-hmm. And there's this new term out there called sober curious, and it's not people who are like having trouble with alcohol who are curious about being sober. It is individuals who have just decided that alcohol does not need to be part of their social interactions. Like they can go out without drinking, whether that's to a club, to a cookout, a gathering, to a conference. And they just enjoy themselves without taking in alcohol. And from what I'm reading, it's much more accepted. You don't get questioned about it. It's more of a you do you mentality. Mm-hmm. And it's not people giving up alcohol. It's people who just say, you know what? I'm not going to drink as often when I go out or as much. They might just drink less. And it's always fascinated me that alcohol plays such a crucial role in our events. I mean, even at conferences, it doesn't matter if it's the ACT conference, the ADAA or IOCDF or whatever initials you want to put in. There's always alcohol involved. You go to a reception, there's alcohol. You go to a wedding, there's alcohol. It's just part of our culture. And I think post-pandemic, younger generation is questioning how much they want to use alcohol. And again, it's not a sobriety, I'm an alcoholic type thing. It's just like, I just don't know that it's necessary for me to have a good time. And I need to read up more on it. However, as someone who hasn't had any alcohol in 29 years, I find it fascinating that people still need to have alcohol in various social situations. And the thought never occurs to somebody or to a larger group. Let's have a wedding without alcohol. Unless somebody's in recovery, then they might. But alcohol is so interwoven into our social fabric. One of the things I get from people who do need to be in recovery when they're entering treatment is, how will I ever be social again? How will I ever go out and have a good time? Well, I have a blast. 29 years.
I can account for that. I've seen you out at parties, and you do just fine without alcohol.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But again, it's a newer term, and I need to do a little bit more reading on it. But it fits into that conversation that I've had with many people over the years as to what role alcohol has in socialization in general. And then you add in people who have anxiety disorders and socialization, and alcohol may even play a bigger role.
And yeah, I mean it's huge
without it. Yeah,
it's huge in social anxiety. It's big in OCD, very common in post-traumatic stress disorder. So we know that alcohol plays and other drugs, right? Too, not just alcohol, but yes. Alcohol and other drugs definitely play a role in people wanting to manage their symptoms, right? Manage their emotions, and maybe use alcohol to either enhance or deaden them. I mean, I've seen people with PTSD who use cocaine to stay awake because they do not want to have any nightmares. And I've seen other people with PTSD who use alcohol and marijuana because they want to make sure that they sleep all the time because they hate the flashbacks they have when they're awake.
Yes. It's the co-occurrence of alcohol or substance use disorder and PTSD ranges from studies where it says 25% all the way up to over 65%. So it is a huge safety behavior for anxiety disorders in general. And as you and I have talked about for OCD, it ranges, the research shows it ranges anywhere from 25% to 44 or more percent of people who use alcohol.
Hmm. It's always unfortunate, maybe, I don't even know if that's the right word, but you know how readily available something like that is for people, even at very, very young ages, when they might even be hiding some of the things that are going on, and they discover drugs or alcohol as a way to manage their symptoms, and they can very, very early on in life get hooked into these things as a way to try to manage what's going on in their life.
Oh, yes. I have been very upfront. When I found alcohol, I hadn't hit double digits in life. I was 9. And I immediately knew I had found my best friend. And it just slowed down all my anxiety, all my thoughts. I had a freedom that I had never felt before. Unfortunately, at that point in my life, I had no understanding of what alcoholism would do to my life, and alcohol and drugs and all of those things, because it became a primary issue.
Mm-hmm.
So you start with just the simple intention of, my head is quiet. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was it. I was like, this is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're jobless and homeless and drinking every day and puking on your shoes and going through withdrawal, and you know your anxiety is still there because it only goes away when you're intoxicated or high. And the minute you come down, you're hungover, strung out, and you have anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the problem. Does it work? Yes, it does, as long as you're constantly using it. Other than that, it's like a compulsion. When you need to stop doing it in order to recover. You know, and I know that's something that not everybody wants to hear, but it's the truth.
Yeah, I've not met anyone who's overcome drinking by drinking more.
No. And I've never met anybody who's overcome OCD by compulsing more.
Right. So they share that in common. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. More is not better in this case.
You also, I think, in both, and having gone through both, Stacey, you're a unique person to talk about this, but you also have to face emotions in both as well.
Yes. Yes. I find it fascinating because I think I've said this before. I know I've said it before many places. I'm just wondering if I've said it here. Is if you have an illness, you know, like cancer or asthma or whatever, we'll let you do horrible things. I mean, you lived through this. The treatment is horrible, but you'll do it. Now, if I ask you to sit down and have emotions, you're like, I'm not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But medical people ask us to do far, far, far more challenging things sometimes. You know, change our diets, do daily injections. If you have diabetes and you're insulin dependent, you need to do that to live.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in recovery for OCD or SUD, you have to sit with self. You have to learn how to manage those emotions. And by manage, I mean accept. Let them be what they are. And realize they will not kill you. I worked with somebody this past week who was having a massive anxiety attack, called me while they were driving a car. First thing I had to do was pull over. And that's all we focused on until they got off the road. But they literally thought they were dying in the moment. And I know that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But I was able to talk them through it. And, their anxiety didn't last forever. Within the next 10 minutes, they were like, okay, I've gotten through this. And it was all OCD driven. And the thoughts just got overwhelming, and they were absolutely certain that, they were going to hurt somebody in their family, that they were going to mess up their lives forever. And none of it was true. And 10 minutes later, they were better. Not that they still didn't have the thought, but they weren't having a panic attack around the thoughts. But they were able to sit with the feeling. And then I was able to meet with them the next day. We talked a little bit more, but again, they've done a lot of work around their OCD. They knew where it was coming from. Their anxiety, their OCD collided at a moment, had a panic attack. But their ability to reach out for help and sit with those emotions. I didn't have a magic wand. We just walked through it until it was done.
There's almost a wish or desire to remove emotions, right?
Yes.
A compulsion can remove doubt, guilt, uncertainty, shame, but then it could also cause it as well too, because the OCD gets worse. So the thing I do to give me temporary relief from the thing that I don't want is the thing that makes the thing that I don't want worse in some ways.
Yeah.
And I think you could say that in addiction as well too. When I have the substance, I stop the withdrawal, which feels horrible. But by having more substance, it makes my addiction worse, which makes it guaranteed that I'm going to have an even more difficult withdrawal when I go through withdrawal.
Yes. And you have the shame of having used again, because there are people in your life with both that don't want you to compulse or drink or use. And you really do want to stop. The desire is there. I've often said I've never met anybody who didn't want recovery, whether it was from OCD or SUD. Everybody wants it, but doing the work for it is challenging, and that's what it takes. And for some people, it can be outpatient therapy. For some people, it's residential. For some people, it's medications. And that's true for OCD. It's true for SUD. It's true for PTSD. And if you have a combination of them, you're definitely going to need to, put some multiple factor plan together to get recovery going. But the shame comes from when the OCD wins, when the SUD wins, and you give in again. And it gets to a point where it used to make you feel better. And now it gets to that point where you feel bad about doing the compulsions. You feel bad about taking in the substances. So it doesn't even help anymore. It's just you feel bad about your internal thoughts, and you feel bad about what you're doing to manage your internal feelings and emotions.
That grasping at straws moment has to be overwhelming, I would think, right? I mean,
yes,
I understand it logically. You've been there physically and emotionally. And what's the turning point? What makes you go from just one more drink, just one more smoke, just one more ritual to it's time. I think sometimes that's the magic question people are looking for here, and there is no magic answer because it's different for everyone. But what was it for you that made you decide that it's time to do the opposite? This is finally the time.
I think it was a combination of a number of things. One, I came of age during the AIDS epidemic in the United States. And I was watching friends die who were drug users and people who were drinking and having unprotected sex were coming down with HIV. And, I was homeless at the end of my, drinking and drugging, and that there's nothing good about that. And so I literally got to a point of desperation where I knew I wasn't going to be able to go on in the same way. And I didn't know that my last time to detox was my last time. I mean, that still dumbfounds me because I had gone in 7 times previous to treatment. And then this time it took in a way that it hadn't before. But I took some steps I hadn't done before in terms of not only going to detox, but going to residential care afterwards, moving away from the area that I was in to a safer location for me. I got some help. I did 12-step meetings, like my life depended on them. I know they're not everybody's cup of tea. I don't really care what you do as long as you do it consistently and it's somewhere you can be honest. Because I have people who ask me all the time, well, what if I, use my community of faith? That's great. As long as you can go in and say, you know what, I'm really craving heroin today. Or I really want to drink. If you can't be honest about what you're feeling and what you're going through, then that can't be your recovery support. And in some cases, you can't be honest in a community of faith. It's just hard. So I did. I went to a meeting every single morning, and I went to a women's group twice a week, and really got involved. I got a job cleaning, and just I did those things for a while. I slowed my life down so I had time to deal with my feelings, and I got in therapy. My first therapist was great for early recovery, not so much for the OCD or PTSD and all the anxiety stuff. But for the day-to-day, how to stay sober, she was fabulous. So, but the thing is, you can get to that point many times. It's just if you're going to surround yourself with people who can be helpful. That's one of the things about 12-step programs. And again, I don't care if you go to Smart Recovery, Women for Recovery. I just use this as an example because that's my experience. Is it gives you a community that will socialize without alcohol. It won't judge you for having a hard time with your emotions. When you say, I can't stop thinking about drinking, they get it. So it gives you a social network that will be supportive of you. And that's really what you need, because you do not get into recovery in isolation. Well, you might get there, but you don't stay there.
Yeah.
So, and then when you add OCD on it, it's important to get into some type of treatment. And if you have to be creative about that, I mean, people learn a lot from these webinars and from your webinar on Wednesday night. They can talk to, NOCD. They could find a support group in their area that, might be running. There's actually a 12-step program for OCD. It's OCD Anonymous. They have their own book and online meetings and such. So if for some reason you can't afford therapy, you can still be creative about recovery supports and find what is out there for you.
We got some questions. Shall we take a look?
Yes.
I'll start at the top as usual. If you want to bounce around, if there's any particulars that you see, feel free to jump in. But Melanie says, how do you get the ending of a song out of your head when you're trying to sleep? It's the song from Grease, the ending scene. I happen to like the song, just not while trying to fall asleep. Do I put my TV up louder to drown it out, replace it with another song, just let it play, worried it will keep me up all night and not let me drift off? Thanks in advance. It plays continuous loop all day. Feels like part of my mind is always going, just won't stay quiet. And she says late perimenopausal, if that matters. I can relate in the, and it just got louder now because I'm about to say the word tinnitus. I have tinnitus, so it's screaming at me right now, actually, because I just said it. And it plays 24/7 as well. It is nonstop. It is the same note that keeps playing over and over. So you have a song playing. I have one note playing. I have never been able to drown it out, and I found that if I try to turn up the TV loud or do other things, that it just is more extra noise in the whole situation. So instead of doing that, I have learned to live with OCD. With tinnitus. I don't have OCD. I have learned to live with tinnitus. I have learned that sound is going to be there, and there will probably, Melanie, be a few nights where you might not fall asleep well, right? And you're going to have to accept that. But eventually, once you start to allow for that, you will start to learn that you can handle it, right? But you're going to have to go through that for some time before you get to the other side. There is no just magic pill in this kind of experience. It doesn't work.
No, but I will also add, since you put it in your question, that you do need to talk to your doctor about perimenopausal symptoms, because guess what? You don't get better. So that does add a layer for women of a certain age. It may not be your OCD or anxiety. Menopause is a real thing, and it comes with real symptoms, and you really need to talk to a knowledgeable physician. And if your primary care ain't that knowledgeable, then go talk to an OBGYN.
Mm-hmm.
Because it does change the playing field.
Let's see. Gaga says, earlier this year, I was able to afford therapy. You highly recommend No CD. Awesome. Well, thank you, Gaga. We appreciate that. Brock says, I'm scared I'm lying to myself and have internalized homophobia. It's scary to think about that instead of, you say HOCD. We call it sexual orientation OCD right now. Yeah, of course, because OCD will always jump to the worst thing in the world. So for somebody who appreciates people with different orientations and a world that's open and accepting of things, OCD would say, well, you have internalized homophobia. You really don't like them, actually. That's why you're thinking about them all the time. And what a horrible person you are. But Stacey, go ahead, throw in on that one for sure.
Well, yeah, OCD will take any scenario that you question and turn it into a whole rabbit hole. It really, that's why it can jump themes. So if you get a handle on this one, there might be another one. And the way to know it's an OCD thought is if it goes down that rabbit hole. If it goes from thought to whole story as to who you are as a human being, then that is an OCD driven thought.
Mickey's wondering about residential programs for OCD. There are those out there. You can go to the International OCD Foundation. You will find a list of them, but off the top of our heads, we know of McLean and Rogers and Mountain Valley and Hopewell and Neurobehavioral Ranch and the Houston OCD program. And those are just the ones that fly off the top of my head right at the beginning. I don't know if you have any other ones you would throw in there. Oh, Lindner Center of Hope has one too. Yep. So those could be helpful.
Yeah. And residential care can really give you a jump start. It is extremely beneficial, but it's also a commitment because they will ask a lot from you while you're there.
That is correct.
So there's one here that says, how do I get over real event OCD when I feel so guilty about past events? Now, for somebody who's in recovery from SUD, trust me, I understand this because I did some really not so great things as a result of my drinking and using. And so, yeah, OCD will take a hold of real life events and torture you with them. The treatment options are the same, whether you take it from an ACT perspective of values, ERP, and learning to sit with the emotions that are around that. Real life events sometimes work out through real life, exposures. I don't necessarily know that I put those on a hierarchy, which is, a way of identifying some exposure work, but really sitting down and taking a look at what you own because it's real and what you don't own because it's OCD.
Lauren said, can OCD latch onto anything? The answer is yes. So I don't know that we need to go any further into anything Lauren said because the answer is yes. But
Yeah.
you say you had a random thought one day that you didn't enjoy sex with your partner as much as you usually do, spiraled into fear that you're asexual, anxiety surrounding anything sexual. Yeah. OCD would never do anything like that, would it, Stacey? I mean,
Oh,
that's
no,
no.
not at all.
I don't understand that. No.
No.
Congrats, Lauren. You're the first. No, you're not the first person
Yeah.
who's had that. You're like the 9,478th person who's had that. Just so you. Okay.
And OCD will latch onto things that are important to you. So if your relationship is important to you, that's where it's going to go. If your recovery is important to you, that's where it's going to go. So
Yeah. Are depersonalization and derealization experiences a symptom of OCD? Not necessarily a symptom of OCD. You often can see those as a symptom of panic, and you can see panic creep into OCD too, because many, again, OCD being the opportunistic jerk of a disorder that it is, will enlist panic into it as well too, and it will say things like, "Hey, if you don't do that compulsion, you're going to have a panic attack," and that would be terrible because you could die from panic attacks, even though you can't. But it'll tell you that you can because it lies all the time. And so maybe it's best to do the ritual just to not have the panic attack. And it could tease a few symptoms of the panic experience at you. And some of those symptoms could be derealization or depersonalization. Stacey, any particulars you like?
is coffee bad with OCD anxiety? I like that one because if I have to give up my caffeine, people are not going to like me. But there is some truth to that. Caffeine is a stimulant. So it's going to play a role in anxiety. It's going to play a role in sleep. So how much you take in and when you take it in matters. And it's an addictive substance. I mean, it's not illegal. I'm not giving it up. But if I stop taking it, I get moody, I get headaches, I go through withdrawal. So caffeine can also be a way people try to avoid as well. Because you're just trying to change the way you feel. Usually you're trying to change not being tired in the morning. But if you're using it to change the way you feel late in the afternoon or into the evening, it's going to impact a lot of things.
Right. I heard a great, it reversed the way I thought about headaches, actually, because I heard an interesting discussion. So OCD is a vasodilator, right? And so your veins get bigger when you drink caffeine. Headaches are actually a vasoconstriction. So your veins are smaller, but you're trying to pump a bunch of blood through a smaller tube, and that's a lot of extra pressure going on, and that's what causes the headaches. So some people feel like, oh, my head's going to explode. And I think you get the visualization of your veins are big and there's extra blood and all these, but it's actually quite the opposite. Your veins are smaller and all this blood's trying to get through. And it's because you don't have the caffeine. So you don't have the dilator effect going on. And that's causing all the pressure that's happening in your head. I just thought that was interesting. Little fun fact for everybody. Mm-hmm.
And there's one here that says, for me, though, ERP with an awesome NOCD therapist, I have learned that one compulsion leads to another. If you enter into the first compulsion, you will spiral. And I will say for me, same goes with drinking or using. I did a talk last year. Who did I do that with? Oh, it actually was this year in July. I think you might have
maybe, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Maybe, yeah. But it was called One is Too Many and 1,000 is Never Enough.
Oh, I was on that panel. What do you know?
OCD and SUD, because that is the truth. So once you give into it, it can take you off to the races.
Why is it that one moment you can be in the midst of a triggering thought, and then when you're out of that episode, you feel considerable guilt? Like, why can't you see this in the midst of an episode? Well, OCD does use all emotions at its disposal. So don't be fooled by the DSM definition that says OCD is about anxiety, because it's not just about anxiety. It's about guilt and shame and disgust and all of those things as well too. And therefore, OCD will grab onto all of those things as a way to try to get you to do something. And if the guilt lever is the lever that gets you to do something, then the guilt lever is the lever that OCD is going to pull. Right? So that's just the way that it is. It's just what it does, because it is a jerk of a disorder, and it knows no levels that are too low. It will stoop to anywhere or anything to get what it wants. That is what it does. Scott says, tell me what you think here. Using alcohol to neutralize the fear and anxiety is not a lot different than any of the other short-term ways to dissipate rumination. In that way, it's no different than a compulsion. So, and that's why I've always talked about there's 5 safety behaviors: avoidance, reassurance, distraction, substance use, and compulsions. And so they can all be used by any kind of condition that we're talking about here as a way to try to overcome the effect of compulsions, obsessions, fears, guilt, shame, whatever it might be.
Yes. And interestingly enough, I mean, I did use a 12-step program, but one of the things I have noticed as a professional in the field is when people get to step 4, which if you're not familiar with that process, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, exactly. That causes a lot of relapse because people, get depressed and guilty and shameful and fearful and anxious, and it uses all the emotions that come up, and people tend to get overwhelmed and hide because they forget that step 5 is we share the nature of those shortcomings with another human being. Because when you bring something out into the light, it often takes the power away from it. And that's what ERP is about, bringing it into the light, letting it be there, and finding out that it is okay and the bad thing didn't happen. And you get to live the life you want to live without OCD driving the bus all over the place.
Or if the bad thing did happen, it probably wasn't as bad as your OC told you it was going to be, and you probably handled it better than you ever thought possible.
Yes. I know. I got a funny story with that. It says, I have emetophobia. And I'd like to say that I'm better with it, but I'm really not. I'm better, but I'm not better. I still think it's a horrible thing and I don't ever want it to happen. But I got a stomach bug several years ago. And of course, I was throwing up and I was miserable. And then when it was over, I called a friend of mine. I said, I did it. I had my stomach bug and I handled it. And you know what? I didn't die and this was good. And I was like, I thought, that is the weirdest thing to actually be like happy about. Yeah.
I had somebody once who came in for the treatment of panic, and we were doing an interoceptive, and it was actually one of the only times someone in all of my 24 years of doing this that somebody threw up doing an ERP exercise. But he confessed that he had a stomach bug. He'd had some food poisoning issues, but he thought he should still go to treatment, and he didn't tell us. And then we had him spinning in a chair as one of our exercises. The next day he came back and he said, I think I'm cured. And we're like, what? He said, yeah, I kind of lied to you and told you that my problem was panic, but I was really afraid of throwing up. And I just hoped that if I learned how to manage anxiety, that might help. But now that I've thrown up and I didn't die, I think I'm okay. And it was like, all right. And sure enough, I mean, we tried all sorts of other exercises. He's like, yeah, it doesn't bother me anymore. I'm pretty good. So it was pretty amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, there we go.
You know,
Did really well.
yeah.
Maria says you have a 16-year-old son who is resistant when it comes to medication or residential. Are these treatments absolutely necessary for recovery? It depends on the situation, Maria. I mean, if somebody's willing to do ERP and they're getting really great results out of it, then awesome. That's wonderful. Some people are resistant to ERP in individual session, and so maybe a higher level of care is required. But Maria, there's also levels of care that come between outpatient and residential. There's intensive outpatient programs, which are 3 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week. There's partial hospital programs, which are 6 hours a day, usually 5 days a week. So you have those as options as well, too, to build up to before you would go into a residential treatment center for it. And then there's even other medical things besides medications. There's transcranial magnetic stimulation, which has been FDA approved now for OCD as well, too, and that might be an option as well. So you have several other options other than residential and medication if you have somebody who's resistant to that. Probably to get into a residential, though, you'll typically have to have failed at those other levels of care and at medication as well, too. They typically don't just say, just go to residential. That's probably not what's going to happen.
Yeah. I think another thing to be mindful of too is, as I just said, with the metaphor, I'm better. Is recovery is a process, not an event. There were times in my SUD recovery where I struggled a lot when my life got stressful, as life tends to do, and my anxiety symptoms went up. The craving for substances went right up along with it. Just having a thought doesn't mean you have to act on it, and having a craving for substances doesn't mean you have to use. A craving is a craving and a thought is a thought. But I think people don't believe they're fully in recovery until they don't have obsessions or they don't have, thoughts about using.
Right.
And that's just not true. You're in recovery as a process, not an event. It's not. And I think sometimes the way we measure recovery, particularly in SUD, like I will say, I haven't had a drink 29 years because it's true. But that doesn't mean that there was that recovery is an event. And I've never struggled with the SUD recovery. I struggle a lot less now because there's time involved. But when I was doing my treatment for anxiety disorders, it would come back and rear its ugly head. And it required more attention.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Okay. That makes sense. Mohammed says, I'm glad to have found your channel when you first got the disorder, it was scrupulosity. You were told that these thoughts were from Satan, and each time they come to you, you have to ask God for protection 1,000 times. And this advice made you live in hell and made your OCD much worse. Mohammed, forgive if I'm making an assumption here, but I'm going to make an assumption of potentially the Muslim religion based on the name Muhammad. And I've treated people who are Muslim who have scrupulosity, and there's a belief in the idea of jinn, which is a demon whispering in your ear doubts about Allah, and therefore that would be the cause of any doubt of a religious nature for someone who's Muslim. We recognize that, of course, in the OCD world as obsessive compulsive disorder, just as we would for any other religion, be it Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and any other religions that would be out there. In fact, by the way, atheists can have scrupulosity too, just so you know. They can fully believe there is nothing, but then wonder, but what if I'm wrong? And maybe say prayers or things just in case, just to make sure. So we know that OCD will lead to doubts and insecurities, even about religion. As we said earlier, nothing is off the table of things that OCD will grab onto, and nothing is off the table in terms of what level OCD will take you down to get you to do a compulsion. And unfortunately, when preachers or imams or rabbis give you advice like, say, prayers that many times, they usually stop being prayers and they become compulsions to the OCD, and they just feed the problem and feed the obsessive compulsive disorder. So there's a big component in that. That's why, again, Stacey, you would have, I think, agree with me. Scrupulosity is not a religious problem; it is an obsessive compulsive disorder problem.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times when I've worked with people who struggle with scrupulosity, I have them go back to their faith leaders to see what is the expectation of their faith, in terms of, how many times a day do you read your holy book, or a week and such, to get a sense of what belongs to OCD and what does not.
One of my very favorite OCD things I heard about religion was someone had said that their pastor had told them that you should start every day off with a prayer. So they set their alarm for 11:59 p.m. every evening so that they would be awake at midnight, because midnight was the start of the new day, and therefore they had to be awake and praying when the day started in order to fulfill the idea of starting every new day with a prayer.
Yeah.
If OCD is not creative, I don't know what it is, because boy, that is creative. Let me tell you. Yes, that is some creativity coming there from the OCD. So,
in my mind, when I just switch religions to when the day starts at sundown.
Yeah, right.
That way I can get the prayer done and go on.
Then you can move on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. Maria asked, do you think that maturity is a factor when accepting treatments? I think so. I think that can definitely play a role for some people. But that can be for adults too. I mean, I've met some amazingly stubborn adults who think, no, I just need to tell myself to stop it, and then this will be fine and everything will be okay. And I say, okay, well, you let me know when that works, and I give them my card, and they almost always come back, within months to years later, saying, why isn't that working? Because OCD eats stop it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's why. I mean,
And comes back for second, thirds, and fourths.
Yeah. If stop it worked, you and I don't have a job, Stacey. We just have a sign on our door that says, if you came here because you have OCD, just stop it. And then, oh, okay, well, I'm good. Thanks. Wow, that was a great session. I really, really appreciate that so very much. That was wonderful. So Someone asked if I was related to Dr. Phil. He's McGrath. I'm McGrath. So no, we are we are not related.
Someone says, for step 9 amends, how do you know what is your step and what is OCD?
Ooh.
Scrupulosity? And that's a good question. And it goes back to step 4 too. You do need to identify what is yours and what is OCD. And in terms of making amends, it says in the step, made amends where possible, except when to do so would hurt you or others. So you got to take the you into consideration. And you may need to ask somebody who's familiar with the 12-step process and OCD. There's nothing wrong with getting a therapist or someone who knows about OCD involved in your 12-step process. I highly recommend it, actually, because OCD, there's a lot in there that OCD can digest and interfere with in the 12-step process, because you do have to separate what is yours from your drinking and using and what belongs to OCD. And here's one of the things I will say that helps differentiate. If you can make amends and move on, but if you're trying to make amends and you have to go back to that person and ask for amends again and again, that's reassurance seeking. So OCD has inserted itself into your step 9.
Mm-hmm.
And it will do that. And it will bring up a lot of issues if it starts rolling around for you in a feedback loop. Then OCD has inserted itself into your step 9 process.
Yeah. And Stacey, could you talk about it? Someone just asked about, for people who aren't into the 12 steps, there's also smart recovery and other programs as well too, correct? That can be very helpful.
Yes, there are. Smart recovery has grown over the years. It's not as prolific as 12 steps, but depending on the resources where you live, there are different options. Women for Sobriety, again, it's a women's program, but that's another organization. I tell people that the important thing is you get a peer support group where you can be honest. And I've run into people whose community of faith put together a group specifically for members to deal with addiction issues through their faith community. And they do a peer support group based on principles, but everybody there can be honest. And they have been very successful doing that, because it's the honesty where you can share what's truly happening within you. And you can tell people when you're on a slippery slope, like, I'm having a lot of cravings for alcohol. I'm doing a lot of hard work in therapy. Also, life happens while you're trying to do recovery. So, I had family members pass away when I was, 6 months sober. That brought a lot of turmoil and stress in my family. And some of my supports were coping with their own grief. So a lot of my symptoms raised back up because of that. And so you just have to be able to find a support community where you can go and you can be honest and you can get that help. Where that is less important as having it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, if you have OCD on top of SUD, you need to go someplace where people are willing to learn a bit about OCD. Because if you don't really understand OCD, some of the thoughts that we have, people go, really? Or they think, they reassure you, no, you won't. Like, I had thoughts of harming others, and people used to tell me, you're a lovely person. You're not drinking anymore. You're not going to hurt anybody. And I'd be like, okay, thanks. And I'd take 2 steps away from them, have the same thought, and go ask somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So they need to understand a little bit about OCD. I had a sponsor who just naturally, I don't know if she had any training in OCD. She just wasn't putting up with me. I'd say, well, I think my heart beat, 3 times in a row. What if I die? She goes, well, someday you will. And that was it. Done. There was no reassurance seeking with her. You know? So.
Yeah. There's been some questions on VTO, so visual Tourette OCD, struggling with staring. John Grayson answered this in one of our Wednesday night webinars that we did just recently, and one of his suggestions was interesting. Just if it happens, he's advised people to say, "Hey, I've got a form of Tourette's that instead of making noises, I stare," and so. Just so you know, it's going to happen. It's what I do, and there it is. So I thought that was interesting. As one way, there's a lot of I think work being done right now on the best way to work on treating that. I don't know of any consensus guidelines as of yet on it, particularly, but he's worked with people on just being open and honest about it. I have a form of Tourette's. So, thought that was interesting.
Yes, my brother actually has Tourette's. And so
Michael.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, I apologize. I cut you off.
Oh no, I just gotta say that's been a journey for him as well, with the different tics and how to explain it to people. And he's gotten to the point in his life where he's very open and honest about all of his tics, and he's just like, this is who I am.
Yeah. Michael asked, is this scheduled regularly? Stumbled upon it and enjoying it. Yes, Michael, we do this the second Monday of every month. So, welcome. Stephanie says, is feeling the need for certainty at the root of OCD? It can be, for sure. How do I accept uncertainty when there is never going to be certainty on an issue? Stephanie, you already do. If you drive a car, you've already accepted uncertainty that you may not actually get where you're going every time you get in the car. And you've accepted uncertainty every time you go up and down a flight of stairs, because you may or may not do that safely. And you've accepted uncertainty every time you lay in a bed, because you may roll over and fall out of the bed and break your neck if you fall out of the bed. In fact, I know somebody who did that once. So it is a possibility, right? And therefore, you already do that, Stephanie, on a daily basis. The only concern really here is that your OCD is saying, yeah, that's all fine and dandy for all those things, but for this thing, I don't know if I can accept uncertainty. For this thing, I actually do need a guarantee. And that's the rub of OCD, the lie, where it tells you it's fine for everything else, but it's not okay here.
I think the flip side of that is, why are we so willing to believe the OCD?
Yeah, I've always wondered that. I mean, I think that that's a fascinating question, and probably at the heart of a lot of things for people. And it's the question that I most frequently get on all of the webinars I do. And I think it comes down to this: why does OCD feel so real? Because I think that can explain why people would believe it. And I always say the answer is kind of a basic one. Due to where OCD is located in the brain, more in the midbrain than in the logic and language part of the brain, OCD is a great manipulator of emotion. And the strong emotions one feels with OCD, we think to ourselves, wow, this must be real, because there's no way I'd feel this kind of emotion if it wasn't real, right? That's just a standard thought that I hear all the time from people who have OCD. How could this be anything but real due to the way that I feel about it? And so my reply is always the same. That's exactly what OCD was hoping you would say. This must be real because of how deeply I feel it. It's not true, but it sure wants that. And if it got you to do that, then it's hooked you.
Right. Although we have emotions when we watch movies that we know are not real.
Right.
So we have experience feeling things.
But Stacey, that's not from in my head. That's external. I know where that's but if I have the thought, I must be volitional in having the thought. I must have wanted it to be there, and now I'm scared that I might have wanted that to actually be. So what a terrible, awful person I am for maybe wanting that to have happened.
Oh, so okay, we take the visual aspect out and I create thoughts and images when I read a book and have emotion
Yeah,
based on a fairy tale.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So never underestimate the power of OCD to pull an emotional heartstring to get you to do something, because that is exactly what it will do, and it will always do that, because that is the nature of OCD. I've talked recently. OCD can do nothing other than its nature, and its nature is to do that very thing, to get you to do a compulsion, and to use any form of trickery necessary to get you to do a compulsion, because the only way that OCD survives is through more compulsions. So OCD has to get you to do compulsions in order to live, because without compulsions, OCD dies.
And the same can be said for SUD. It's got to come up with ways for you to use and reasons for you to use, because the only way it survives is if you continue to put those substances that are destroying you into your body.
Right.
So it will
Yeah.
tell you you can't handle this. It will tell you you can't socialize. It will tell you you're going to die. You can't deal with withdrawal. You can't deal with the emotions. You can't deal with OCD. That those conversations in your head are very, very similar.
Right. Stacey, you want to tell everyone about our special interest group that we have and where they can go find information about us?
Absolutely. We do the special interest group for OCD and SUD as part of the IOCDF. So if there's not enough acronyms here for you, well, I can come up with some more. But you can find our website at www.ocdsud.com. We have previous presentations up there. We've got some great videos of Patrick talking about OCD, SUD. We have these links to all of these webinars, because somebody said that he just found this and he's enjoying it. We've been doing this for this year. We started in January, but all of our webinars are linked on that page. We have previous town halls. We have some articles. We have some books, resources that might be beneficial. Go ahead, feel free to check it out. And if you have questions, there's a contact us form. Those emails come to me. And I'd be happy to answer what questions I can. One thing I do not do is hand out reassurance. So if you ask the same question over and over again, I will not email you back.
Right.
I did have someone do that recently.
Yeah. And if you're looking for treatment for obsessive compulsive or related disorders, you can check us out at NoCD.com. NoCD is a platform for the treatment of OCD and related disorders. We work with OCD and hoarding and tics and BFRBs as well. And we would be more than happy to set up a time with you. You can go to our website, www.nocd.com, and click on the therapy button there, and we will do a free 15-minute call with you to see if we might be able to assist you. We work in the US, in Canada, the UK, and Australia, and we do take insurance here in the US as well too. So hopefully that would be helpful to all of you as well. We will be back again, of course, if you're interested in seeing us again. We are always here, as we said, on the second Monday of every month. And then I'm also on every Wednesday of the month as well too, doing this. If I didn't get to your question tonight, please come over on Wednesday night and pop it in again, and let me know that we didn't get a chance to get it in this one, but I'll try to get it in on Wednesday then for all of you. Stacey, as always, it is great to see you, and I thank you again for being with us and for sharing your personal stories with all of this as well too, because I think it's a great example that therapy works when you follow the steps, when you follow the programs, and when you do your ERP. Yeah. All right, everyone. We'll see you again in a month. Thanks for being here. Talk to you then.